we're at a severe disadvantage, I think, as we read these little passages from, be it the Old Testament or a gospel or a letter. We miss the context in which it is being written, say whatever come before and after. And I think that's particularly true here in these readings, especially the first reading. If you go back just a few verses, you find out that first Elijah is responsible for this drought, okay? He had told Ahab the king that he was going to call this drought upon him because he had been a very disappointing king. And then God said to Elijah, he said, now Elijah, why don't you go hide in this place over here and you'll have whatever you need. But the water ran out. So God then said, and this is the verse just before we start today in that first reading, I have prepared a widow in this town, and she will take care of your needs. So he sends Elijah to this town, and that's where we meet this woman, this widow today. Otherwise, it makes no sense. You know, before I'd read that other part years ago, I thought, this guy's got a lot of gall. You know, he calls down this drought. It hurts all the people. It doesn't bother the king all that much, I'm sure. You know, they're the ones that are suffering. And then he tells this woman, and he's in a different tribe now, not in his own tribe even. And he says, get me some water. Get your own water. You know, that's me, you know. But then he says, and besides that, maybe you could have a piece of bread or a cake for me. You know, and she turned around, and she was so nice because God had prepared her. He had prepared her. Her people come from a culture of hospitality, that when you are welcoming a stranger, you are welcoming God. And that's probably what God had deepened within her, had prepared her, so when this stranger comes, she's almost dying from hunger, from lack of water herself, and her poor child. That makes it even more difficult. And yet, she acquiesces, and she is blessed. Now, if you continue on another chapter or two in this story of Elijah, he gets very frustrated because the people aren't doing any of the things they're supposed to do. This has not brought them around. The king hasn't come around. The people haven't come around. So he takes off and he hides in a cave. And God finds him. And he says, Elijah, step outside. I'm going to pass by now. And there's this crackling of lightning, and that thunder is booming, and rocks are bouncing around, and it's pouring rain, and there's fire everywhere, and there's no God. And finally, in the silence, God comes by, and Elijah covers his face so he can't see. It's in the silence that God prepares us. It's in the quiet. That's how he prepared this poor widow. Not in the angry shouting of people about the drought, people fighting over food, people blaming other people for this or for that. That kind of energy, that's not where God's going to be. God's not going to be in calling people names or laying blame at someone's feet or giving up and shouting how mad you are. No. It's going to be in the quiet that he shapes and forms who we are. Now we come to this second widow. And of course, an adjective that always goes with widow is poor. And the reason for that is this. Jesus makes it very clear when he says that about the scribes. He says, they seat themselves in places of honor at the synagogues and at banquets, and they devour the houses of widows. If a man dies and leaves his house, his home, to his widow, right away the scribes come. They're the ones who can write. They're the ones who know the laws. They're the ones that will help her. And in no time at all, she's got nothing. In no time at all. That's what he means there. Jesus is saying this. I'm not. They devour the houses. They take of themselves. And they leave these widows in their poverty. So this beginning of this story is about social justice, yes. He wants them to know, I know what you're doing. You're not going to get away with this. But then again, there is this woman. She's been shaped and formed by God. She knows her 2 little pennies are not going to make any difference in feeding anybody. You know, the synagogue's not going to make any changes with her 2 cents. The gift that she gives means nothing to the temple. but it means everything to her. Everything to her. Because this is the God she has fallen in love with. This is the God she chooses to love, to adore, and give herself to. She must give him something. This isn't something the temple demands. This is something her heart demands. I want to give you something. I'll give you all that I have. You know, Jesus is always talking about how difficult it is for people with wealth to get into the kingdom of God. And I think it's precisely for this reason that as long as we have wealth, we have some kind of power. We have a sense of control over our lives. Now, all of you have control over your lives. Even if you flunked out tomorrow, you'll be able to go home and have a place. Even those of you who graduate and there won't be a job out there, you won't be homeless. You have power in who you are and how you've been raised and the gifts that you have, the intelligence and the drive. All those gifts are there. You don't really need God. You really don't need God. So how are you ever going to feel what these two women felt? Well, I think life has a way of breaking us down, putting things in our way. You can't call them God's will, okay? Everybody says, oh, why did this happen? It's God's will. No, it's not God's will. God's will never wanted this child to die in an auto accident. That's not God's will. But my child died in a car accident, and I need to deal with this. And the only way I can do that is to turn to a God who I know loves me and give myself away to this God and surrender. Because I am powerless. I don't want to wish on you tragedies. That would be a little bit heavy-handed. But you will experience them. And what you're building now, see, you're here now because you know there's something that you need. This God you really need. So don't forget why you're here. You're trying to recognize that in the end, all I have is God. All I have. Death will be part of your life. How do you deal with it? How do you deal with the dying of others you love and of your own dying? If you have not been steeped, as the widow in the first reading was steeped in God's presence, it will be terrible. You know, I've tried being poor and then moderately successful. And I hated being poor. And it made me smaller. It didn't make me bigger. I was mad at everybody, you know. So being poor is not necessarily a good thing at all. But if you are poor, you have a chance then maybe to see how powerless you are. So I ask you in this liturgy, ask God to just open your mind and your heart to how dependent you are upon our God who loves us so much, who wants to shape and form us in his hands and gather us to himself.